Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, September 18th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside will reach a high of 87.1 degrees Fahrenheit today, with a low of 70.2. It's shaping up to be a warm day, so stay cool and hydrated if you're out and about. Coming up on Alex's News, we'll be delving into the critical questions surrounding the CDC's vaccine policy and the claims that it is facing a scientific integrity crisis. Following that, we turn our attention to the economy, exploring why many are arguing that the Federal Reserve's recent decision to cut interest rates may be overlooking some deep-seated structural job issues. We'll break down what this means for workers and the broader economy. All these stories and more are coming up next on Alex's News. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, everyone. A profound crisis of scientific integrity and leadership is gripping the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, largely stemming from the actions of U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Ethan, many are calling this a troubling situation, not exactly a shot in the arm for public health, is it?
Grace, you're right. It's a significant shakeup. The recent Senate testimony of former CDC Director Dr. Susan Menarez and former CDC Chief Medical Officer Dr. Deborah Howry has brought this turmoil to light.
Let's start with Dr. Menarez, who had an incredibly brief tenure as CDC Director. What led to her ousting?
Dr. Menarez was confirmed on July 29, 2025, becoming the shortest-lived director in CDC history, fired by President Trump on August 27th, according to PBS NewsHour. In Senate testimony yesterday, September 17, 2025, she stated she was ousted for refusing Secretary Kennedy's demands. She wouldn't commit to approving every vaccine advisory board recommendation, regardless of science, nor would she dismiss career officials without cause. She claimed she was, quote, fired for holding the line on scientific integrity, as CIDRAP reported, directly refuting Kennedy's claim that she resigned.
She wasn't the only one to depart, was she?
No, Dr. Deborah Howry, the former CDC Chief Medical Officer, resigned in protest after Menarez's firing, alongside two other top officials, PBS NewsHour reported. Howry testified that Kennedy censored CDC science, politicized its processes, and stripped leaders of independence, calling for his resignation. She warned that without adherence to science, the U.S. could face an uptick in preventable diseases, stating, quote, "We don't want our children to die," unquote.
Secretary Kennedy's actions are at the heart of this. What has he done to draw such strong criticism?
Kennedy, known for questioning vaccines, reportedly told Menarez there was no science or evidence for the childhood vaccine schedule and expected her to change it anyway, according to PBS NewsHour. His administration has enacted controversial policy shifts, including defunding $500 million in mRNA vaccine research in August, a move critics say slows pandemic prevention, as NPR reported. In May, he also announced that COVID-19 vaccines would no longer be recommended for healthy children and pregnant women, a decision Howry stated lacked supporting data for CDC scientists.
A central point of contention is the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP. What changes has Kennedy made to this crucial body?
Grace, the ACIP is vital for vaccine recommendations. Kennedy fired all 17 sitting members in June and appointed new ones. On September 15th, just 3 days ago and days before its current meeting, he added 5 more, bringing his handpicked total to 12, according to NPR. The new ACIP chair announced a systematic examination of the, quote, cumulative effect of the recommended vaccine schedules, a move the American Academy of Pediatrics called an anti-vaccine trope.
And that reconstituted ACIP is meeting today? What's on the agenda?
Yes, today and tomorrow, September 18th and 19th, the ACIP is meeting, discussing hepatitis B, measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella, or MMRV, vaccines, as well as COVID-19 vaccines, as reported by CDC.gov. Former CDC officials expect to vote against recommending the universal newborn hepatitis B vaccine dose, possibly delaying it until age 4. Senator Bill Cassidy even suggested postponing this meeting, as PBS NewsHour reported.
What about the broader impact on the CDC workplace?
It's created a climate of fear. Oury noted many CDC personnel refused to speak about vaccines due to fear of violence, PBS NewsHour detailed. This follows a targeted shooting at the CDC last month. Over 750 current and former HHS employees signed a letter demanding Kennedy stop spreading inaccurate information and guarantee workforce safety, according to NPR.
And how are lawmakers and states reacting?
Democratic senators expressed deep concern. Senator Rand Paul questioned Monarez's vaccine stance. However, Senator Bill Cassidy, a physician, passionately defended the hepatitis B vaccine, calling its 1991 approval an, quote, accomplishment to make America healthy again, as PBS NewsHour reported. Critically, states like Colorado began revamping vaccine policies in spring 2025 to ensure continued access due to federal changes, according to NPR.
Ethan, this is a truly alarming situation. Thank you for that comprehensive report and for keeping us all informed on this critical issue.
My pleasure, Grace.
We'll be keeping a close eye on those ACIP meetings. Next, we turn to our second story. Welcome back, everyone. For our second story this morning, we're diving into the economic news that broke yesterday, September 17, 2025, which saw the Federal Reserve make a significant move. Joining me now with all the details is our financial reporter, Chloe. Chloe, what's the big news from the Fed?
Grace, it was quite the day for the economy. Yesterday, the Federal Open Market Committee, or FOMC, of the Federal Reserve Board's Board of Governors announced a decision to lower the target range for the federal funds rate by 0.25 percentage point. This now sets the rate at 4% to 4.25%. As CBS News and the BBC reported, this is the first interest rate cut since December of last year or late 2023, depending on the source, bringing rates to their lowest point since late 2022.
A 0.25 point cut. That's a pretty precise move. Was there unanimous agreement on this decision?
Not quite, Grace. 11 of the 12 voting members, including Chair Jerome Powell, supported the cut. However, according to reporting from the Federal Reserve itself and CBS News, newly confirmed economic advisor Stephen I. Miron cast a dissenting vote. He advocated for a larger 0.5 percentage point reduction, wanting to go for a deeper economic trim, if you will.
Interesting. So, Chloe, for our viewers who might not be economists, what exactly is the federal funds rate and why is this cut such a big deal?
Good question, Grace. The federal funds rate is essentially the target interest rate that banks charge each other for overnight loans. When the Fed lowers this rate, it's like sending a ripple effect throughout the economy. It generally makes it cheaper for banks to borrow money, which in turn usually leads to lower interest rates on things like mortgages, car loans, and credit cards for consumers. It's an easing of monetary policy, intended to stimulate economic growth and borrowing.
So this is the Fed trying to put some pep back in the economy's step. What was the rationale behind this move?
Exactly, Grace. The primary drivers for this monetary easing, according to the Federal Reserve's press release, were a moderation in economic activity during the first half of the year and what they described as a, quote, stalling or weakening, end quote, U.S. labor market. Chair Powell specifically highlighted rising, quote, downside risks to employment, end quote, noting that people at the margins, such as recent college graduates, are having difficulty securing jobs, despite a low layoff rate. This is a significant shift from the Fed's, quote, solid, end quote, job market assessment in July, with the U.S. labor market seeing meager job gains in August and July, and an outright loss in June, the first decline since 2020, as the BBC uncovered.
It sounds like the Fed is really keeping its finger on the pulse of the job market. But what about inflation? We've heard a lot about that recently.
That's right, Grace. Despite the rate cut, inflation remains above the Federal Reserve's long-term target of 2%. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, has ticked up to 2.9% over the 12 months to August, and the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, the Personal Consumption Expenditures, or PCE index, is expected to hit 3% this year before receding. The committee also noted that uncertainty about the economic outlook remains elevated, with specific concerns around immigration, trade policy, and tariffs contributing to price increases, according to the Federal Reserve and the source, quote, what it means to lower interest rates, end quote.
So they're cutting rates even with inflation still a bit high. What are the Fed's projections looking like for the rest of the year and beyond? Are we looking at more cuts down the road?
Well, the Fed's own economic projections anticipate 2 more rate cuts in 2025 and just 1 in 2026. This is a more conservative outlook than what Wall Street investors had projected, which was 5 cuts through 2026, according to CBS News and the BBC. The central bank forecasts the unemployment rate, currently at 4.3%, to rise to 4.5% by year-end before gradually declining. While there was initial unity on yesterday's quarter-point cut, FOMC members are split on the path of future monetary policy, with many not anticipating further cuts this year.
Now, Chloe, we know economic decisions often have a political backdrop. Has there been any political pressure on the Fed regarding these rate cuts?
Absolutely, Grace. The rate cut occurred amidst significant political pressure from President Donald Trump, who has consistently criticized Chair Powell for moving too slowly to ease borrowing costs. As the BBC and CBS News reported, he's even labeled Powell a, quote, real dummy, end quote. However, analysts like Art Hogan of B. Riley Wealth believe Trump's rhetoric had, quote, zero impact, end quote, on the Fed's decision, attributing the cut to underlying economic activity. It's worth noting globally, central banks in the UK, Europe, and Canada have already implemented rate reductions.
So it's not just us making these moves. You mentioned the Fed's dual mandate earlier. Could you explain what that means and how these rate cuts play into it?
Of course, Grace. The Federal Reserve, as the U.S. central bank, operates under a, quote, dual mandate, end quote, to promote maximum employment and stable prices. Lowering the federal funds rate is an, quote, easing, end quote, of monetary policy. It's intended to stimulate economic growth and combat a slowing economy or rising unemployment by encouraging borrowing and investment. The idea is that cheaper borrowing costs incentivize consumer spending and encourage businesses to invest and hire more workers. This often leads to better stock market performance as safer investments yield less.
That all sounds positive, but are there any potential downsides or risks to cutting rates like this?
There certainly are, Grace. While intended to boost the economy, lowering interest rates carries several potential risks. Excessively low rates can spur inflation, create asset bubbles, and reduce earnings for savers. The Federal Reserve explicitly acknowledges a significant concern, the risk of, quote, stagflation, end quote. This is a challenging economic condition where unemployment and prices both continue to rise, coupled with stagnant economic growth. According to Empower.com and UltimaMarkets.com, as of late 2025, the U.S. economy faces a discernible risk of stagflation, with persistent above-target inflation and a weakening labor market.
Stagflation sounds like a real economic tightrope walk. You mentioned a weakening labor market. Is this rate cut the right tool to fix that, or are there deeper issues at play?
That's precisely where many economists and policy experts are raising flags, Grace. There's growing concern that this interest rate cut, while well-intentioned, may be an ineffective tool for the actual causes of the U.S. labor market slowdown in late 2025. This concern stems from the argument that the primary economic headwinds are supply-side in nature, not just a broad-based slowdown in aggregate demand that monetary policy can effectively address. Investopedia.com and LinkedIn.com highlight that if unemployment, particularly for recent college graduates, stems from structural issues like skill mismatches or industry-specific downturns, then lower borrowing costs alone won't directly address these underlying problems. In fact, if inflation is driven by supply-side factors like tariffs, as the Federal Reserve's own statements noted, stimulating demand through rate cuts could actually exacerbate inflation without fixing unemployment.
So if the problem is more about people's skills not matching available jobs, what are the alternatives? What kind of policies would actually help?
That's a great question, Grace. Given the limitations of monetary policy for these structural issues, experts are advocating for a range of supply-side economic policies. For instance, the U.S. Department of Labor launched industry-driven skills training fund grants just last month in August 2025, totaling up to $30 million to create training programs in high-demand sectors like AI infrastructure and advanced manufacturing, as reported by DOL.gov. The quote, America's Talent Strategy, end quote, blueprint also emphasizes expanding work-based learning models like registered apprenticeships. There's also advocacy for expanded access to skills training and education, including extending Pell Grant eligibility to high-quality, short-term training programs. Other suggestions include investing more in public workforce systems, promoting skills-based hiring, and even targeted immigration policies to address critical worker shortages, as outlined by FoxBusiness.com and TheGuardian.com. It's a holistic approach, aiming to address the root causes rather than just stimulating demand.
Fascinating insight, Chloe. It sounds like while the Fed is doing its part with rate cuts, a much broader strategy is needed to truly mend our economic fabric. Thank you for cutting through the complexity and bringing us this detailed report.
My pleasure, Grace.
We've been speaking with our financial reporter, Chloe. And that's all for this segment. Stay tuned, we'll be right back after this short break. Here are some other headlines. In the world of late-night television, it seems the last laugh is on Jimmy Kimmel. ABC has indefinitely pulled the plug on Jimmy Kimmel Live, following remarks the host made about the killing of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk. During his monologue, Kimmel characterized the accused murderer, Tyler Robinson, as being part of the quote, MAGA gang. However, law enforcement officials have since indicated that Robinson held liberal political leanings. The decision to suspend the show came after major station owners, including Nexstar and Sinclair, refused to air it. The FCC also weighed in, with its chairman thanking broadcasters for doing the right thing and suggesting potential fines. The move, which some critics like Governor Gavin Newsom are calling an attack on free speech, follows the cancellation of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert back in July. Meanwhile, officials in Alabama are being told to redraw the lines. A federal judge has ruled that Jefferson County's commission districts are an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. U.S. District Judge Madeline Haikala found that the county's 2021 map illegally packed black voters into 2 districts, diluting their influence in the other 3. The ruling is a major victory for the NAACP and other plaintiffs who argued the map violated the 14th Amendment. It's certainly not a pretty picture for the current commission, which now has 30 days to work on a new, constitutional plan ahead of the 2026 elections. In Florida, a box of trouble has been opened in the federal trial of Ryan Routh, the man accused of attempting to assassinate Donald Trump in 2024. 2 brothers testified that Routh left a container at their home, which they only opened after his arrest. Inside, they found pipes, bullets, and a handwritten 12-page letter that began, "This was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, but I failed you." Prosecutors allege Routh was aiming a rifle through shrubbery at Trump's golf course before a Secret Service agent opened fire, causing him to flee. The trial continues before Judge Aileen Cannon. And now to a truly heartbreaking story out of Pennsylvania. A quiet Wednesday afternoon in North Codorus Township turned tragic when a gunman ambushed officers serving a warrant for a domestic dispute. 3 officers with the Northern York Regional Police Department were killed. A 4th officer and a York County Sheriff's deputy were also wounded and are in critical but stable condition. State police confirmed the shooter was killed at the scene, and there is no further threat to the public. Governor Josh Shapiro called it a devastating day for the entire Commonwealth. Finally, in California, Governor Gavin Newsom has a big dose of legislation on his desk. He must decide the fate of several landmark healthcare bills. One proposal aims to cap out-of-pocket insulin costs at $35 a month, a second attempt after Newsom vetoed a similar bill last year. Another bill looks to regulate pharmaceutical middlemen, requiring them to pass 100% of drug rebates on to insurers. Other proposals would speed up the prior authorization process for medical care and strengthen privacy by shielding patient information from immigration authorities and allowing abortion pills to be mailed in anonymous packaging. The governor has until October 12th to write the final prescription on these bills. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.